Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope.
4 legs good, 2 legs bad.
It's June 1974. In Toulouse, France, anxious fans wait for their evening concert to begin. The lights dim and 4 scruffy-looking roadies wander onto the stage to tune up and plug equipment in. After several minutes, these roadies begin to test the equipment by playing slow, unknown chords that can be faintly heard over the audience chatter as people wonder when the actual show will start. The roadies are of course the Pink Floyd, and the show has in fact started with their new track Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Without the sparkle and high gloss production of the finished version, this melancholic new offering does indeed come across as a slow and laboured number, with many writers at the time commenting that the new post-Dark Side Floyd seemed to be lacking in focus and direction. The music press also commented on the general scruffy appearance of the band. Even by early 1970s standards, their clothing was considered shabby, their hair overlong, greasy and unkempt, and with a general lack of audience interaction, many thought that the band had become lazy since peaking with Darkside. The French tour was the first to feature the band's now famous circular cinema screen, and in a move claimed to keep ticket prices low. Although they lined their own pockets considerably through it, the band signed a sponsorship deal with the French drinks company Genie. A year earlier, the Floyd had flown out to the Moroccan desert to take promotional photographs for this lemon drink, along with a silver Rolls Royce and chopper bikes that followed them from venue to venue on their short French tour. The deal apparently didn't go down well, with fans and the music press accusing the band of selling out. The band quickly came to regret this move, with apparently all of the money raised being donated to charity. Perhaps as a result of this, the band and crew members played a game of football with some local journalists. It's unknown if the Guinness t-shirts that they wore around this time were themselves another sponsorship deal or a band in-joke, possibly to piss the Genie company off. The Genie venture didn't, however, stop ardent socialist Roger Waters agreeing to other corporate tie-ins around this time. Speaking of which, it's now time for a commercial break.
If you feel it, peel it.
The 74 tour continued later that year across the UK. To accompany these shows, a tour programme was produced. It was largely created by Nick Mason in the style of a comic book, with each member of the band becoming a cartoon character. It's great fun and demonstrates just how important this band's visual identity was to them. The next new tune that the band played on the 74 tour was much heavier and nastier than anything they created since the days of Careful With That Axe Eugene. With an aggressive opening and bass line and a similar title to One of These Days I'm Going to Cut You Into Little Pieces, this was Raving and Drooling, I Fell on His Neck with a Scream. Like Shine On, this track began life in January 74, and although Waters is its chief writer, one gets the feeling that musically the band is still very much a democracy at this point, with all members contributing in equal measure to the overall shape and textures of the tracks. With memories of both boredom and pain, the bitter tone of the lyrics were perhaps the result of Waters' fragmenting marriage around this time. They paint a picture of a person becoming angry and delusional as they retreat into safety and hiding, and the song gives us the first real taste of the bitter and critical tone which would come to dominate much of Rogers' later writing.
Raving and drooling, I fell on his neck with a scream.
The music is equally powerful and threatening. Mason's drums provide an advancing, pounding fret which is sharpened by Gilmour's piercing and stabbing guitar lines. Over it all is the swirl of right synth, which adds to the general feeling of terror and foreboding. Rogers' menacing and repetitive bass phrases leads us into a surreal middle section, which is also lifted from One of These Days, with hints of the otherworldly Doctor Who TV theme. This partially improvised bridge is perhaps the last gasp of the old psychedelic Floyd, and with the band seemingly enjoying themselves, this middle sequence became more elongated and abstract as the tour progressed. There were two other tracks that were developed in the latter part of 74. One is generally considered to be Welcome to the Machine, but this probably wasn't completed enough to be performed live, and the other song was called You've Gotta Be Crazy. Again, this wasn't completed in time for the French shows. It was hurriedly knocked into shape just prior to the band's UK tour, and to a degree, it shows.
You either got it or you want it.
In this early form, there are just too many words for the space given to them, and you can almost hear Gilmour gasping for breath as he struggles to cram all of the bitter side swipes into each verse.
Gotta admit to a lot of confusion, pain in the head of the China collusion. Gotta resist this screaming malaise, gotta believe in the way you get out of the pain.
The music is all Gilmour's, but the accusatory lyrics are Rogers and focus on the general weight of expectation and pressures of middle-class suburban life. All three songs were featured in the now famous Tour 74 bootleg recorded in Stoke. The album came with a glossy colour sleeve and had lyrics printed on it that were taken from the tour comic, some of which differed from the actual version sung, indicating that the tracks were very much evolving during the tour. With many fans believing that they were buying a genuine follow-up to Dark Side, which was the intention for these new tracks at the time, this bootleg album is reported to have sold 100,000 copies. That's a figure that would have placed it well into the UK top 10 at this time. In In January 75, the band set about recording the 3 new tracks, beginning with Shine On. However, by March, Roger had decided that the next album needed more of a conceptual theme, something that these 3 tracks together just didn't provide. Despite the disagreements of Gilmour, it was decided that Raving and Drooling and You've Gotta Be Crazy would be sidelined in favour of the existing Welcome to the Machine and the newly written Have a Cigar, both of which gelled more into the theme of music industry greed. Maybe the change in direction was because Waters ultimately knew that this album needed a more radio-friendly hook for it to stand up against the fame of Darkside, something that wouldn't come along till later that year with the actual Wish You Were Here song.
Who was born in a house full of pain? Born in a house full of pain. Fitted with bridal and beard. Fitted with bridal. Who was offered a place on the board. Who was found dead on the floor. Who was dragged down by the storm. Dragged down by the storm.
It wasn't until April 76, when the band took up residence in their newly created recording studio in Britannia Row, that the 2 discarded tracks would finally be developed into what became the Animals album, the concept for which wasn't introduced until relatively late in the recording process. You've Gotta Be Crazy had its pitch dropped and it was slowed down to allow the more adapted lyrics to be better sung. It gives the verses some much needed breathing space, and we can finally now hear the words and better visualise the vivid images that Waters paints.
You got to be crazy. You got to have a real need. Got to sleep on your toes when you're on the street. You got to be able to pick out the easy meat with your eyes closed.
His lyrics now adopted the themes laid out in George Orwell's Animal Farm book. The idea that animals adopt human traits and social conventions. The dogs here are the hungry go-getters, stabbing their colleagues in the back to break away from the pack and climb the ladder of success.
And after a while, you can work on points for style.
The opening chords and strumming are deceptively warm and cosy, and it isn't long before this develops into a gallop, and then with One Eye Looking Over Your Shoulder we have Panic as the true nature of the song unfolds. Gilmour dominates the early stages of this track with his guitar echoing the warnings to the dogs and lamenting their demise as they fail to heed the advice given. He adds a variety of different guitar textures across the track and some beautiful and poignant solos. The song enters an abstract middle section dominated by Rick Wright's swirling keyboards, and we hear the faint howl of the dogs as they have a good drown, dragged down by the stones around their necks and the general weight of expectation on their career-driven lives. Suddenly, as if pulling itself to safety and shaking the water from his fur, we hear Waters as the dog himself, and with a moment of clarity he wonders if someone, maybe the pigs, are simply pulling his strings and using him for their own ends. After all, dogs trust no one.
Gotta admit that a little bit confused. Sometimes it seems to me as if I'm just being used. And it seems to you the thing to do would be to isolate the winner. Everything's done under the sun. And you believe at heart everyone's a killer.
The song concludes in a similar way to Eclipse on Darkside, with a cyclic list of accusations for the dog to reflect on as he grows old, alone, and working himself to the bone and to an early death. The undoubted triumph of the album and one of the highlights of the career, Dogs provides us with one of the best examples of both the harmony and the rivalry between Waters and Gilmour. It's a real group effort, with Mason and Wright intertwining between the other two to weave the track together. It's like they almost act as referees, ensuring that the two bickering and biting animals don't tear each other apart. Well, for the time being at least.
It was straight down by the zone.
Raving and Drooling was similarly altered, with its lyrics completely reworked to focus on Orwell's sheep, who mindlessly obey the will of others without question. Although the track was originally written by Waters, in 1974 Richard Wright spoke fondly about developing it, and in many ways he is the standout player in this version here. He opens the track with a calm and deceptive solo as we are lulled into a false sense of security while we chew the grass. We soon find out that things are not what they seem, and with this Waters thunders in to make the sheep scatter. He warns of a certain unease in the air as the sheep follow their herd towards their own slaughter. Mason provides a steady pounding threat that is echoed by the rotating and creeping advance of the bass, which is played here not by Roger but by Dave Gilmour, who also adds bursts of stabbing guitar as the dogs are sharpening their knives. And midway through the song we hear the dogs float by, still drowning by the weight of that stone. Despite a fast and furious tempo, it somehow lacks the bite and nastiness of the earlier live versions. The abstract mid-section isn't quite as surreal, but it does now introduce us to what could be the sheep's saviour, in the form of an alternative Psalm 23 from the Bible, "The Lord is my shepherd."
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me down to lie. Through pastures green he leadeth me, the silent waters by. With bright knives he releaseth my soul. He maketh me to hang on hooks in high places. He converteth me to lamb cutlets. For lo, he hath great power and great hunger. When cometh the day, we lowly ones, through quiet reflection and great dedication, master the art of terror. Lo, we shall rise up, and then we'll drink the bugger's ice water.
In the Pig song, Roger focuses his lyrics on 3 different character traits that he dislikes. The first pig is characterised by big businessmen with their head buried in the trough they keep on digging. Holding a false hand on their hearts, they fool both the sheep and the dogs who do their bidding. The second pig, who likes the feel of steel, is the Iron Lady herself, Margaret Thatcher, an emerging political figure in the mid-70s and soon to be divisive British Prime Minister. A headline around the time described her as having a knight of the long hat pins, and this is probably where the line about her looking hot with one comes from.
Almost a joker, the door, get down in the pig bin, say, keep on digging.
The track is dominated by Mason's tight percussion, which provides a meaty framework for the chugging bass, again played by Dave Gilmour. Many American fans have mistaken the song's White House reference to being the seat of their president. In reality, it refers to a British social campaigner at the time called Mary Whitehouse, who campaigned for a lot of on-screen censorship around this time. The house-proud town mouse apparently took legal advice over her inclusion in this song, but perhaps being conscious that a lot of what she campaigned against she inadvertently ended up promoting, she backed off. A highlight of the song is Gilmour's Heil talk box, which was an effects pedal connected to a mouth tube. It allowed them to distort and vocalise the guitar output, creating the sound of the greedy pigs. The effect was popular around this time, but as expected, Gilmour, the champion of understatement, never overdoes its use. Coming into this review, I always had it in my mind that it was the lyrics that were the most defining aspects of this album. However, on reflection, I've come to change this opinion, and I feel more that it's Gilmour's phenomenal playing that brings the different characteristics of the animals to life best. The sheer volume of different emotions that he creates with the guitar is staggering. Everything from fear, determination, greed and joy are all perfectly presented to us. And his decisions over what to play, how to play it, when to play it, and most importantly, when not to play are sheer perfection. Like two dogs with a bone, perhaps the emerging tension and Beatlesque rivalry between Waters and Gilmour is what makes this album work so well, with the track Pigs on a Wing being the most divisive track on it. This short acoustic number was originally designed to be one song with a Gilmour solo in the middle. Now, apparently by accident, this solo was wiped from the tape by Waters. Coincidentally, guitarist Snowy White was visiting the band in the studio to discuss playing with them on the live tour, and he was asked to do a new solo instead. This apparently wasn't the first time that a Gilmour solo was accidentally deleted by Waters, with a Dogs one also being wiped at one point. The decision to split Pigs on the Wing into two tracks and bookend the album is a welcome one, as it provides a necessary warmth and shelter from the rest of the album's cold shafts of broken glass. However, splitting the song into two parts would now resulted in Waters having 2 additional writing credits on the album, with a 5th more royalties, as opposed to it being left as a single track. Now, one can easily see how this left Gilmour with his tail between his legs, and despite his Dogs track representing half of the entire album and his playing totally dominating the record, he received only 1 co-writing credit. All animals are equal, it seems, but perhaps some are more equal than others. Despite being critically well received at the time, Animals went on to sell far fewer albums than both Wish You Were Here, Dark Side and The Wall. But however, over time it seems to have grown in stature, with many fans now considering it to be the band's greatest work. Much has been said about the bitter, cynical tone and aggression of the album being Floyd's response to punk, and this was how it was perceived at the time. The reality though is that the bulk of the album was written 3 years prior to its eventual release, and well before the Sex Pistols had even formed as a band. I feel Waters' decision to alter the direction of the initial post-Dark Side follow-up and sideline Raven and Drooling and You've Got to Be Crazy was the right one, with the tracks maybe just being too nasty and anarchic for 1974 listeners. Maybe it just needed punk to open the door and finally allow Floyd's Animals off the leash. Fans got to see the Animals in the flesh in January 1977, with a tour that started in Germany before moving across Europe and the UK before heading over to America and Canada in April. Although the US leg of the tour proved immensely profitable, the shows were starting to become unmanageable due to the sheer volume of fans now wanting to see the group and also their behaviour. Fans were increasingly letting off fireworks and whistling through performances, especially during the quieter passages that they'd once, and rightly, sat in silence throughout. Waters' frustration grew and his patience wore thinner as the tour progressed.
You stupid motherfucker! Why doesn't anybody else in here with fireworks just fuck off and let the rest of it get on with it, you cunt?
Pathetic.
The ever-increasing amount of lighting and smoke and inflatables and cinema projection saw Waters take to wearing a pair of headphones during the show. This enabled him to sync up his and the band's playing and the stage effects better. However, the results were that it cocooned him further away from the live experience and alienated him more from both the band and the fans. Exhausted by the increasing frenzy of the complicated logistics of the show, at one point he collapsed prior to one gig and had to be injected with a muscle relaxant to enable him to perform. This was something that would go on to inspire The Wall's Comfortably Numb lyrics. The infamous final show of the tour resulted in a near riot, with Waters spitting in a fan's face. And night after night of the Animals tour, we can clearly hear the first bricks of his wall being laid. While many Floyd fans take exception to the way Waters came to dominate this band and see it as a vehicle for his own political and ideological beliefs, personally I admire him for this, and I respect the fact that he stayed true to them and he's still just as angry and uncompromising today as he's ever been. Whilst the central themes of Animals are just as relevant to our society as when Roger, or Orwell for that matter, first wrote them. Maybe this is the whole point, and the human nature ultimately can't and maybe shouldn't be changed. Besides, where would the band be without the dogs to buy their records year after year? Or the sheep turning up at their concerts? Or even without the big pigs and their welcome machines that allow the whole music industry to happen in the first place? Maybe 4 legs are better than 2, after all.
It was a cruel song, but fun.
All those of you who didn't bring your fireworks, thank you for coming. We've enjoyed it.